The sound hit the concrete walls like a thunderclap. Not a whistle, not a buzzer, not the roar of a crowd. This was something far more violent, far more personal, and far more permanent. The heavy metal door of the Atlanta Dream's locker room didn't just slam shut that night. According to multiple witnesses standing in that tunnel, it was kicked clean off its hinges by a man who had completely and utterly lost his mind. A head coach who had swallowed months of frustration, months of embarrassment, and months of watching his franchise slowly bleed out, and had finally, on this particular night, reached the absolute end of his rope. What was about to happen inside that locker room was not going to be a post-game talk. It was not going to be a stern warning or a fine quietly handed down behind closed doors. What was about to unfold in front of that entire roster was something that players in that building will talk about in hushed tones for the rest of their careers. A career execution. Cold, brutal, and completely final. But to truly understand how this night arrived at that locker room door, you have to go back to what happened on the hardwood. Because the explosion didn't start with the coach. It started with one single moment, one single shot, one single player who had every opportunity in the world to save herself and chose, somehow, to let it all collapse. This was supposed to be a celebration. The television networks had been building this matchup for weeks like it was a heavyweight championship fight. Promo after promo, segment after segment, the sports media machine had locked in on this game as must-see television. Millions of viewers cleared their schedules. Casual fans who hadn't watched a WNBA game all season tuned in specifically for this one. The advertising dollars were enormous. The expectations were sky high. And sitting right at the center of all that hype, right at the center of every pregame graphic and every breathless analyst prediction, was Angel Reese. The narrative had been crafted carefully. She was going to be the story, the dominant force, the player who would silence every critic who had spent months questioning whether her game could match her personality. The Atlanta Dream's front office had bought into it, the media had bought into it, and Angel Reese herself had bought into it louder than anyone. But basketball doesn't care about narratives. Basketball doesn't care about promo packages or media arrangements or how many followers you have. Basketball only cares about what happens when the ball is in the air. And from the opening tip-off, the ball was telling a very different story. On the other end of the floor, something genuinely historic was unfolding, and it almost felt unfair to watch. Caitlin Clark was not just playing well that night, she was operating on a completely different plane of existence from everyone else on that court. From the moment she touched the ball in the first quarter, the arena felt it. There was an electricity around her that you simply cannot manufacture, cannot coach, and cannot fake. She was pulling up from logo distance on contested threes and burying them like they were free throws. She was finding teammates with no-look passes that left defenders stumbling over their own feet, completely wrong-footed and helpless. Every single possession she touched felt like a clinic being conducted in real time. The commentators couldn't help themselves. Every few minutes, another jaw-dropping moment forced them to reach for new language, new comparisons, new ways to describe what they were witnessing. Clark was smiling out there, not the forced smile of someone trying to look confident, the genuine, relaxed, almost casual smile of someone who knows exactly where they are and knows they are exactly where they belong. She commanded that floor the way a seasoned veteran commands a practice session, completely in control, completely comfortable, and completely devastating to anyone foolish enough to try and slow her down.
She finished that game with numbers that belong in highlight reels for the next decade. Three-point shooting that defied logic, assists that made the highlight reel before the ball even reached its target, and a performance so complete, so dominant, that even the most stubborn critics in that building had no choice but to sit back and watch something special happen. But greatness only shines brighter next to failure. And on the other side of that court, the contrast was becoming almost too painful to watch. Angel Reese was unraveling in slow motion, and the entire sports world had a front-row seat. It started small, a forced shot in the first quarter that clanged off the back of the rim and drew groans from the Atlanta faithful, a complaint to the referee after a clean defensive stop that drew a quick look from her own coaching staff, a missed box out that gave the Fever an easy second chance opportunity that they immediately converted. Small things, individually, but in basketball, small things have a way of piling up, and as the game progressed, the pile was getting dangerously high. By the second half, the frustration was no longer something Reese could hide. It was written all over her body language. The slumped shoulders after a turnover, the exaggerated eye roll at a referee's call, the visible irritation every time a teammate's play didn't go exactly the way she expected. The crowd could feel it, the commentators could feel it, and most importantly, her coaching staff, sitting in those sideline chairs with clipboards and furrowed brows, could absolutely feel it. Reports would later surface that during a timeout in the third quarter, there was already a serious conversation happening on the Atlanta bench about pulling Reese from the game entirely. The team was fighting to stay competitive, scratching and clawing to keep the score close against a Fever squad that was simply clicking on all cylinders, and their supposed franchise centerpiece was becoming more of a liability than an asset with every passing minute. But coaches are human, they believe in their players, they hold on to hope. And so Angel Reese stayed on the floor, carrying the dead weight of her own bad night, waiting for one moment that could flip the entire script. That moment came, and what she did with it will be replayed for years. With the clock bleeding down in the final moments, the game was sitting on a knife's edge. Both teams were exhausted, both benches were on their feet. The crowd was at a fever pitch, tens of thousands of fans collectively holding their breath with every possession. This was the kind of pressure situation that separates players who belong at this level from players who are simply pretending to. A broken play scrambled possession across the court, bodies colliding and redirecting, and when the chaos settled for just a fraction of a second, the ball ended up in Angel Reese's hands. She was standing mere inches from the basket. The nearest defender was completely out of position, still reacting to the broken play. Clark was on the entirely opposite end of the court, nowhere near the action. There was nothing between Angel Reese and the basket except 4 feet of open air and the easiest shot in professional basketball. A layup. Off the glass. The kind of shot that players make in warm-ups with their eyes half open, talking to a teammate about something completely unrelated. The kind of shot that muscle memory alone should handle without any conscious thought required. 11-year-olds make this shot. High school bench warmers make this shot. This was not a moment that required greatness. It didn't even require competence. It simply required the player to exist and release the basketball. She jumped, she released, and the ball slammed violently against the underside of the rim like it had somewhere else to be, ricocheting away as the final buzzer screamed through the arena. The silence that followed lasted for maybe half a second. Then the building absolutely erupted. Not in celebration, in shock, in disbelief, in the kind of collective gut-punch laughter that only comes when something goes so spectacularly wrong that the human brain doesn't quite know how to process it at first. The cameras did what cameras always do in moments like these. They found the story. They panned immediately to Clark, walking off the court on the winning side, and caught her expression in perfect, merciless detail. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't anything she manufactured for the cameras. It was simply the authentic face of someone who had just watched the basketball universe deliver its verdict in real time. A slight smile, eyes that said everything without a single word needing to be spoken. Angel Reese didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the floor, and then she started the long, slow walk toward the tunnel that would lead her directly into the worst moment of her professional life. Here's where the story gets even more uncomfortable, because the missed layup was only part of the disaster. In the days and hours leading up to this game, something had been arranged behind the scenes that tells you everything you need to know about how the sports media machine really operates. Reports surfaced suggesting that certain major networks had made a deliberate, coordinated decision to make this weekend entirely about Angel Reese, regardless of what actually happened on the court. The plan, allegedly, was to run the celebration narrative no matter what, to champion her, to hold her up as the dominant force of women's basketball, to draw comparisons to some of the greatest rebounders in the history of the sport. And it worked beautifully, right up until it didn't. Because while the broadcast was busy pushing a carefully constructed storyline, the actual box score was quietly telling the truth. 3 of 10 from the field, turnovers at critical moments, defensive breakdowns that cost her team on the scoreboard in ways that the broadcast booth was strategically choosing not to discuss. The word catalyst was being used generously on air. The shooting percentages were being mentioned far less generously, if at all. There's a particular kind of media protection that exists for certain athletes, a bubble of favorable coverage that buffers them from accountability for long stretches of time. And for a while, that bubble had served Angel Reese reasonably well. But bubbles have a limitation. They cannot survive contact with reality indefinitely. And reality had just crashed through in the form of an uncontested layup that hit the bottom of the rim and bounced away on national television.
You cannot spin a missed layup. You cannot reframe it. You cannot hide it behind graphics or talking points or carefully chosen highlight packages. It just sits there, permanent and undeniable, available for anyone with an internet connection to watch on a loop forever. And the internet, as it always does, got to work immediately. While the memes were still being assembled across social media, inside the concrete tunnel beneath the arena, something far more serious was happening. The Atlanta Dream's head coach had not cooled down on the walk from the sideline. If anything, the walk had given his anger more time to compress, to intensify, to build additional pressure the way steam builds in a sealed container. Witnesses present in that corridor described the expression on his face as something beyond anger, beyond frustration. It was the expression of a man who had made a decision and was completely at peace with the consequences of it. He didn't wait for the locker room to settle. He didn't wait for the water bottles to be distributed, or the training staff to finish their assessments, or the assistant coaches to find their seats. The second the roster was through that door, according to people who were present, the room became a volcano. "You are a complete fraud." Those are the words that reportedly opened the address. Not a question, not a preamble. A verdict delivered at full volume, with a voice that had clearly been waiting months to say exactly that. The concrete walls of a professional locker room have very little acoustic mercy. Every word bounced and echoed and landed on every single person in that room with full, unfiltered force. What followed was not a coaching speech. It was not a breakdown of tactical failures or a discussion of defensive assignments or a plan for how to improve next time. It was a full, systematic dismantling of Angel Reese's standing within the organization, conducted publicly in front of her teammates, with zero concern for how it would land. The coach went directly to the business side of the sport, the part that athletes sometimes forget matters just as much as the game itself. He reportedly laid out in explicit, painful detail exactly what Angel Reese's presence on this roster had cost the franchise. Television ratings that had been sliding for months, sponsors who were growing nervous and asking uncomfortable questions, a national fan base that had been promised a star and was instead watching drama and excuses and missed shots. He wasn't right about the ratings. The numbers had been circulating in sports media circles for weeks. Games featuring Angel Reese as a centerpiece were not delivering the viewership that the organization had projected when they built their marketing strategy around her. And the gap between what had been promised and what was being delivered had been a source of serious internal tension for longer than the public knew. "Look at Caitlin Clark," the coach reportedly said,
pointing directly at Reese, while the rest of the room sat completely frozen. No one in that room moved. Veteran players who had been in professional basketball for a decade stared at their shoes. Rookies who had idolized Angel Reese from a distance sat paralyzed by the realization that the room they were sitting in had just fundamentally changed. The air itself felt different. Reese apparently attempted to respond, to offer something, an explanation, a defense, anything to create a small amount of breathing room in the middle of that onslaught. But the coach didn't allow it. He shut it down immediately. And what he said next is the part that sources say no one in that locker room will ever forget.
The words came quietly, which somehow made them worse. When a man who has been screaming drops his voice to almost a whisper, the entire room feels it differently. The rage doesn't disappear, it concentrates, it becomes precise, and the words that come out in that register carry a finality that shouting simply cannot achieve. Pack your bags, clean out your locker. Then a pause that lasted for several seconds. You are done. You are never putting on this jersey again. As long as I am the head coach of this organization, you are completely banned from this facility. And that was it. No follow-up discussion, no conditional language, no suggestion that things might look different after a night's sleep or a conversation with the front office. The door to Angel Reese's tenure with the Atlanta Dream had just been slammed shut with the kind of cold, absolute certainty that leaves no room for appeal. The coach turned to the rest of the roster and, according to sources, addressed them directly for several minutes after that. He talked about standards. He talked about accountability. He talked about the difference between players who want to be famous and players who want to win. And then the meeting was over. Angel Reese left that locker room carrying her belongings and her reputation in whatever remained of both. By the time the first reports started leaking to the press, the story had already grown larger than basketball. The WNBA as a league has spent years fighting for the respect and coverage that it deserves. It has made genuine progress. Viewership numbers have improved, sponsorship deals have grown. The arrival of generational talents has brought new audiences to the sport in ways that the league had been trying to engineer for over a decade. And a lot of that growth, a significant portion of it, has come on the back of one specific rivalry: Clark and Reese, Fever and Dream, the college rivalry that carried over into the professional game and became the lens through which millions of casual fans first engaged with women's basketball. It was real, it was electric, and it was genuinely good for the sport. But rivalries require two competitive forces. They require both sides to show up. They require the tension to be earned on the court, not just manufactured in press conferences and social media posts. And over the course of this season, one side of that rivalry had been doing all the work, while the other side had been largely surviving on the fumes of a narrative built months ago. Caitlin Clark had played that night like someone who understood the assignment completely. She delivered for the fans, for the broadcast, for the sport, and for her team. She had been, by every measurable standard, exactly what she was supposed to be. And now, with Angel Reese officially separated from the Atlanta Dream under circumstances that will follow her wherever she goes next, the landscape of the league has shifted in ways that no one fully predicted. The brutal truth of professional sports is this: the game will always tell you who you actually are. Not your social media numbers, not your endorsement deals, not the carefully produced documentary content, or the magazine covers, or the promo packages that run before tip-off. The game itself, in those final seconds, when the crowd is screaming and the clock is bleeding out, and the ball lands in your hands with nothing between you and the basket, that is the moment of truth. That is when everything you are and everything you are not gets exposed completely, with no filter and no edit and no second take. Angel Reese had that moment. She had a gift wrapped and handed directly to her, a chance to win the game, silence every critic, and rewrite the story of her entire season in a single motion. The basketball gods, who are occasionally cruel, but very rarely this theatrical, gave her the most dramatic redemption scenario imaginable. She missed. And now the conversation has shifted permanently, not just about this game, not just about this team, but about the future of a career that was supposed to be ascending and is now, instead, standing in a parking lot with a box of locker room belongings and a missed layup that will live on the internet forever. Clark, meanwhile, has no such complications. She walked off that court with a victory, a masterclass performance on film, and the knowledge that she did exactly what was asked of her when it mattered most. Her trajectory is pointing in one direction only. The sport gave its verdict, the scoreboard confirmed it, and a locker room door, kicked off its hinges somewhere beneath an arena in Atlanta, marked the exact moment when one player's story ended and another's moved into an entirely different chapter. What happens next in this league, now that its most talked about rivalry has been altered at its foundation, is a question that nobody has a clean answer to yet. But one thing is certain: women's basketball is never boring, and whatever comes next, it will be worth watching. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did the coach go too far, or did Angel Reese bring every single bit of this on herself? And what does this mean for Clark now that the competition just got a whole lot quieter? Subscribe and stay locked in, because this story is nowhere near finished.